so I've been playing Metal Gear Solid 2.
Once upon a time, on a dark, rainy night in Tokyo, Japan, a small elf and/or Asian person called Hideo Kojima sat down at his desk to write a new fairy tale. A sequel, it would be, to one of his earlier works highly regarded amongst those of nobility. "Quite the undertaking," said the petite Hideo to himself as he tightly gripped one of his favorite Lego blocks. Poor Hideo was quite distraught, you see, as, while the king was rather pleased with his earlier works, he now demanded a work that would be far greater in stature, improving on almost every facet, yet retaining its original glory. So, after much struggling with ideas and concepts, the small man finally exclaimed a rather loud "Fuck it!" throughout his tiny little house. "If he wants the same thing, he'll get the same thing." A few minutes had passed, however, as Hideo stared at his computer screen, still unsure of his daring yet rash decision. "I know," he said as he ate his strawberry-flavored Pocky because he's Japanese, I guess. "I'll add a plot twist through, something postmodern and really pretentious, but also clever enough to be able to get away with it." And so Hideo brought his work to the king, whom received it with great pleasure. He specifically enjoyed the return of the triumphant hero Sir Solid Snake. Well, that is until Sir Solid Snake dies. After which, poor old Hideo was beheaded.
And now, we get to play as Raiden. Yay! Raiden is a secret agent spy guy man person working for a group of secret agent spy guy man people called Foxhound. And he needs to infiltrate an offshore oil spill cleanup facility called the Big Shell because some asshole called Solid Snake kidnapped the US president and may or may not want some ransom and also has a bomb of some kind. However, things aren't exactly as they seem. And that's pretty much the main premise. To go in any further would spoil the entire mindfuck that this whole game in all actuality is. In fact, revealing Raiden's presence is already kind of a spoiler in and of itself. Thing is that this game was essentially marketed as just being more of the same, whilst in truth not really being that at all, but also still kind of. Either way, the game's story is really fucking weird, and evidently it's also the point where the series shed itself. Though one could certainly argue that the shitting in question was of a very high quality and texture. But that doesn't take away from the fact that at one point early on it's revealed that the first game's villain, Liquid Snake, still lives on in Ocelot's arm. And you'd really have to suspend your disbelief pretty fucking far to be able to buy into this shit. I can though, as I think it's actually kinda interesting considering some of the things that they do with it. But even for me, it's pretty hard to deny how fucking stupid this is, especially out of context. And also in context. Anyway, where the first game was very, and I mean very, cutscene heavy, this game is very, and I mean holy fucking shit, very cutscene heavy. And that's not really saying anything about the violent barrage of codec calls you get during all of the longer conversations, but also just with about every single fucking room you enter. Personally, I fucking love it, but also holy shit. To most people though, and by most people I mean everyone that isn't me, this is considered to be very fucking tedious. And yeah, the game almost literally interrupts you about every 5 minutes or so. and that's really not an exaggeration at all. Still, all of this is done on purpose, and it's there to serve a point in a semi-pretentious, postmodern kind of way. Which is why, in certain circles, most of which I partake in to jerk vividly, this game is considered to be brilliant. Not so much as a video game, but more so as a work of art because of its commentary on stuff and things. A lot of said commentary represents Hideo's frustration with his audience and the people above him, aka the king, and also some other stuff having to do with the series' overarching tsunami of pretentious drivel about war, technology, and voluptuous titties. But basically what all of this boils down to is that it's just a bit sucky on purpose. Now, from a gameplay standpoint, this game is really fucking similar to the first one. Like, it's straight up lifted the mechanics, UI items, and even the overall structure. It does expand and improve on some things, all of which I will get into in a bit, but to avoid sounding like a person trying to avoid sounding like a broken record but failing horribly, I'll try and avoid sounding like a person trying to avoid sounding like a broken record but failing horribly. Again. So, to keep it short, set pieces, arcadey stealth, vision cones, and kinda clunky controls that work really well once you get used to them. Unlike any of the other MGS games though, this game takes the word set piece rather literally, as in that the facility which the game takes place in is literally just a bunch of big hexagonal struts connected end on end, and each one houses its own stealthy little puzzle. It's a little bit transparent to say the least, especially on multiple playthroughs. And while this does have story reasons, what I won't get into because spoilers, Lazy, and Super Bunny Hop already did it anyway, I can't help but feel that it seems just a bit too meh at times. Not bad by any means, but its transparency, though likely on purpose, makes the game feel incredibly static as a result. Anyway, despite its see-through design and copy-paste mechanics, it does actually play a lot better than the first game. Mostly because of the vastly improved AI, the smooth-as-tits controls, and the slightly more complicated and varied set pieces and events. Don't get me wrong, its representation of stealth is still very questionable and arcadey, but excluding the story's interruptions, it just flows and plays a lot better overall. You see, where the first game kinda blew all of the load available over the first two rooms by going through most of the mechanics and gimmicks at once, here, every strut centers around a gimmick or mechanic of its very own in an attempt to make the game feel relatively fresh throughout. Which works to a degree. I mean, there are definitely a lot more varying gameplay sections in comparison, though they are very densely put together and it can kind of feel like the game never lets you go, and it certainly feels like a much longer game than it actually is. Especially now, while having the capture window running, I noticed that which felt like hours usually only was about 45 minutes. And I mean this in the best way possible. There really is quite a lot going on here in terms of different mechanics and set pieces, and while they might not all be of the exact same level of quality, I'd still say that this is good. The only thing that kinda dungs all over the variety is the rather large amount of backtracking. I mean, they make you go through the entire big shell twice, and then a couple of additional laps if you want to go back to get a certain weapon from the warehouse whenever you get a new keycard. It's not great, and all further games will avoid this design from here on out, and for very good reason, as it kinda diminishes the challenge with every lap. Which, well, is also kind of a good thing, as having to do the same exact shit over and over again could be a bit annoying, but it also greatly fucks up the threat that these enemies pose. It essentially breaks the puzzle-like set pieces, as all you end up doing is shooting everyone in sight before you properly enter the room. Of course, there are ways to limit yourself on purpose, like going for a non-lethal run, but the fact that you have to self-impose challenges to make the game play as intended just seems a little bit weird to me. It really should have just played like this in the first place, but its overall design just doesn't seem to allow for it in the long run. Now, a common complaint stacked up against the first game was that most of the time the players spent their playthrough looking at the mini-map rather than at the actual game. I didn't really comment on this too much back in my review other than saying that the game mostly took place on a 2D plane despite its 3D graphics. But here, as a way to kinda mediate this, they added this crazy little thing called nodes.
Did you say nerd?
These nerds are essentially just computer terminals placed in every strut from which you can toy around with the game's settings. The only catch is that you need to access these nodes every first time you enter a strut just to be able to download the map layout. So especially early on, you'll be going into quite a few of these set pieces blind. And yeah, just to be clear on this, I kinda find this a bit hard to comment on as I'm more comfortable with the Big Shell's layout than I am around box standard self-deprecating social anxiety jokes. And because of that, I'm honestly not too certain how this will affect a virgin playthrough. The only thing that stood out to me regarding this is how much it highlights how shitty the camera can be sometimes. And I mean, if you watch my videos regularly, you'll know that I loves me some survival horror style cameras, but in this case, it's just really quite awkward. Like, without the map, you'll likely be doing a lot of stopping every 5 steps to enter first person mode just to be able to look ahead. And while I do think that a slower pace is to be expected for a stealth game, it is just a wee bit too disruptive here not to comment on it at all. Thing is as well is that compared to the first game, the areas tend to be a lot bigger. There's quite a lot less hallway funneling and much more open rooms with more than one way around the problem, which is great for a lot of reasons and it adds a shit ton of replay value. But it is just a little bit fuck when you can't actually see the room properly. I don't know. The nodes are very much the double-edged sword, I guess. Like, I know the game well, and I like the extra layers of difficulty and tensions that they bring even on repeated playthroughs. But it's also a bit awkward, and it lays bare some of the game's integral design flaws that would have otherwise been less glaring. So yeah, the game is pretty fucking good. But only if you like Metal Gear and Kojima's odd way of doing things. As a stealth game on its own, I'd say that it's a bit held back by its story-heavy focus and also by being too arcadey for people wanting a legit stealthy challenge like what the Thief games do. Kojima has a history of making visual novels before he went big. And this entry shows his background more so than any of the other MGS games. Still though, I love this game quite a lot, and it's also stylish as fucking fuck. You can question Hideo Kojima's skill as a writer all you want, but the combination of him, Yoji Shinkawa's artwork, and Harry Gregson Williams' music really makes for some incredibly well-made cutscenes that are chock full of screenshot moments. It's a bit masturbatory perhaps, but pretty damn sexy nonetheless. In any case, a lot of the game's flaws could very well be discredited as being intentional. And I'm sure most of them are, and none of them were detrimental to my enjoyment of the game either. But I can totally see that being nothing but a load of bullshit in the eyes of a lot of people, as quite frankly it just kind of is. I mean, there's a handful of lost in translation artifacts and awkward lines being that the game is Japanese and all, and I honestly can't see that as being anything other than just a fuck up. Weird meta-narratives are all fine and dandy, but I'd really like to see anyone try and explain away this.
Stroke the water and move forward by pushing the punch button. Push it in rapid succession to swim faster.
Change your heading with the left stick. Up will take you up, down takes you lower, left and right to face those directions.